The alarm clock woke Wade up with a start. He had been deep within his own dreamland, so the noise had brought him up a bit jarringly. However, a smile quickly appeared on his face, replacing the look of shock and annoyance. Today he started the Hawthorne job, and it would be at least 7 times more lucrative than any other past job. The widower, John Hawthorne, had hastily moved from a remote location deep within the Appalachian Mountains to a new location about as far into the Olympic Mountains of Washington State as one could possibly go. It was rumored that he just couldn't stand living in his isolated mansion without his wife any longer, so he found similar forest about as far away as he could possibly move to build or buy a new palace in paradise. This ideal had brought him to Washington State in the used mini-mansion he bought on top of a mountain, and the weathered roof in bad need of repair had brought him to Wade, or more specifically, Wade's Weatherproofing and Roofs, a business Wade had been running with great success for almost 12 years now. Locals knew you could hire a larger company for quicker work, but Wade offered better quality work at a slightly more reasonable price, and this fact had made his small self-owned company quite popular with the locals. For living in Washington with the notorious weather, you wanted the best possible quality of roof available. Wade had prepared everything the prior night, from setting out his tools to be easily loaded into the 4-wheel drive work van, to presetting his coffee maker to where one simple push of the button would take care of the whole process. This made his morning routine go by much faster, getting him on the road almost 45 minutes ahead of schedule. Wade always despised being in a rush, especially for more important matters like today. He kept going over a checklist in his mind to ensure he didn't leave anything behind. Even though he had driven so far, he really couldn't turn back even if he wanted to. This job was a bit different than the others due to the extremely remote location of the mansion in the Olympic forest. And yes, mansion was most definitely the right word for the marvel of constructive ingenuity he would be working on. It was 7 stories high on top of a mountain that he had never visited, and was unnamed, so its geography couldn't even be located on any form of GPS. In other words, there was no proof that the mountain actually existed. But Wade had seen firsthand how rich people created their own laws in reality, so it didn't immediately alarm him. The location dwarfed all other mountain peaks surrounding the area, so to say he would be working high up was one hell of an understatement. Its architecture was unorthodox as well. Most mansions were wide and extra long, to give the owner an open and large area, simulating their own little private world. This creation traded its width for height, perhaps to try to achieve the best view possible. This fact also made this job by far his most dangerous, and required Wade to purchase extra safety equipment. From a new body harness in case he would need to hang at odd angles or, God forbid, fall off. He also bought a couple of special long hatchet-like tools he could stab into the roof if he was to start sliding off, similar to ice picks that mountain climbers use for relatively the same reason. Even though his titanium hammer had an extended claw on it that made it a similar pick-like tool, he was forced to put it to the test on a particularly high roofing job he did a couple years ago. He was walking down an unshingled part of the roof when he slipped on some loose nails someone had spilt out of their tool bag. While falling down, he first attempted sinking his claw hammer into the wood with only half luck, going in less than an inch before his body weight and momentum ripped it back out and continued his unwilling descent. Only with God's grace, he often states, and every ounce of adrenaline and upper body strength, was he able to sink in the extended claw, thus stopping his fatalistic demise of human versus gravity with his feet just 11 inches from the roof's edge. After seeing how high this roof was, he decided to buy the ice picks and put together some custom leather sheaths to holster them so he would be able to pull them out quickly and safely if the need arose. He had also bought a cordless nail gun, which wasn't quite as powerful as the corded ones, especially the larger old model he called Biggin, for its extreme power and the fact it could fire off the large 3.5-inch heavy-duty framing nails. Although the older model Safeguard, the piece of steel that prevents the nail gun from firing off until it's pressed firmly down against the wood, had broken off, he was able to successfully spot weld it back on in working order, deeming it fit for one last job before being replaced. He also thought it wise to bring his 12-gauge shotgun, with both double-aught buckshot and grizzly slugs, which looked similar to shotgun shell with a hollowed-out mini rocket inside. Real powerful stuff. The Olympic Forest is home to many large predators, and he was going to be as far out in the wilderness of Washington as one could get, and on top of a mountain, so it was not at all far-fetched to assume he could run into trouble. After almost an hour driving through the highways that transitioned into smaller local backroads and now gravel, he was about to reach the base of the mountain. In another 6 minutes he had arrived. Pausing at the entrance that was gated, he exited his vehicle and punched 0333 into the digital panel, which beeped 3 times before opening to him almost soundlessly. He put his van in 4-wheel drive, took a sip of coffee, and began his long ascension up the mountain. Wade knew from coming up to price the job almost 3 weeks prior that the trip up the mountain would take the better part of an hour, so he put on a playlist of downloaded music to help ease the trip up. He would usually just rely on Spotify or Pandora to take care of the musical needs, but already knew that such things were useless out here where data is mostly pointless and Wi-Fi is practically non-existent. In preparation for this, he had downloaded hundreds of songs and podcasts to accompany him on the job in Lonely Mountain. He let himself zone out on the trip upward, barely even noticing anything around him as he enjoyed some of his favorite music over the past 30 years. Wade was 47 years old, so he had quite a wide variety of music he had enjoyed over his lifetime. With his mind half wandering through random thoughts and half in whatever music was currently playing, Wade almost missed the pair of large antlers up on the hill by his right, above the gravel road. He only caught the tip of them before the shrubbery they navigated through had given them cover. He pressed on his brakes, bringing the vehicle to a slow stop as to not skid gravel, and optimistically waited for the antlers to reach the end of the thicket, hoping to catch a glance of the creature. After almost a minute of waiting, he thought that it must have fled in another direction, and went to put the vehicle back in 4-low from park when his patience was suddenly rewarded. A massive buck had now slowly exited the thick bushes, and displayed itself proudly upon the hilltop for Wade to marvel at. It was above and beyond any buck Wade had ever seen. Not one record-breaking photo he had ever seen online or on television even came remotely close. This deer was bigger than any moose he'd ever seen, which was impossible, thought Wade in near shock. He hastily grabbed his phone to catch the beast on video. However, by the time he fumbled his way into his pants pockets to grab his phone, he was so excited that he didn't execute a good grip with his left hand, and dropped it on the floorboard before he had it halfway to the open passenger side window for a picture. "Shit," he muttered under his breath before frantically reaching for the phone. He reached down so quick, though, his seatbelt snagged him halfway with the safety feature, slightly knocking the wind out of him. Of course, by the time he had overcome the gauntlet of mundane obstacles in his way, the ancient buck was gone, existing only in his memory now. Sighing and letting out a few choice words, he shifted back into 4-low and continued his ascent. People just don't see things like that out their windows every day, you know, thought Wade before sifting through his current playlist of music, before deciding just to go with a random audiobook to try and focus on something else. As he arrived to the second gate at the top of the mountain preceding the estate itself, he once again exited the vehicle to punch in a digital code for entry, the only difference being that he typed 0999 this time. After only a few dozen feet past the gate, Wade saw a man standing directly in front of the mansion's entrance, with his hands clasped behind his back in a patient yet serious manner. The man was old but in most excellent shape. I'm not saying he was in shape for his age, which was about 70 from his appearance. No, he was in shape for anyone's age. He was about 6'2" and about 185 pounds, with a short military-style flat-top haircut that held 3 long lines on the right side of the haircut's fade, just above and behind the ear, and spanned about 6 inches, stopping just before it reached the very back of his head. As he approached closer to the gentleman, pulling in sideways on the driver's side door which faced the man, he noticed in slight awe that the lines on his head were in fact scars. This would be Wade's first time actually meeting Mr. Hawthorne in person, having only communicated through phone and emails before now. Even when Wade had priced the job, there wasn't a soul up here. Exhaling deeply, he put his most professional and courteous face on. He opened his door smiling. Mr. Hawthorne, with his hands still behind his back, wore a slight smile, almost a smirk, which, accompanied by the fact that he looked like his muscles were carved out of stone, gave Wade the impression of a great leader, like someone made a perfect statue of an elder protagonist hero. Wade also felt a certain energy or aura as he approached the man, like he had seen and done things Wade couldn't even imagine, and such things as roof repairs were simply trivial to him. "Good morning, sir," Wade cheerfully exclaimed to him, outstretching his right hand to the man whilst approaching. The man's smirkish smile grew slightly wider across his face as Wade approached, giving the man a warmer and more welcoming demeanor. The man then held out his right hand as well, mirroring the gesture displayed by Wade and also making him stop approaching suddenly with a shocked look on his face, making an expression that said, "What the hell am I looking at?" At first glance, Wade thought he was wearing some kind of shiny glove. However, after just a few moments of true observation did Wade realize, with a small amount of surprise, this was in fact his hand. A hand that could only be considered normal if you were a freaking Terminator. "It won't bite you," Mr. Hawthorne said comically, snapping Wade out of his stupor. "Sorry, sir," he said before completing the introductory gesture, shaking the man's unique hand. Mr. Hawthorne very gingerly shook Wade's hand as if he was trying not to hurt him. "I've never seen a prosthetic like that, sir," Wade said. "It moves so fluently. I bet it must have cost a pretty penny, no doubt." "Here," said the man, both changing the subject and revealing his left hand that had remained behind his back until now. His left hand was both normal and holding a key. "This is for you," he said to Wade while handing it to him. "This will give you access to the first floor of the house, including all the amenities and supplies. There's plenty of food, bathrooms, drinks, and pretty much anything you could possibly need. I even left the gun safe open in case, God forbid, you run into any trouble up here. It's not uncommon at all to see grizzlies and mountain lions this far out." "On the way up the mountain, I actually saw the biggest buck I've literally ever seen in my life," said Wade excitedly. "I mean, it was unnaturally big, and not afraid of my loud vehicle in the slightest, which is odd to say the least." This statement made Mr. Hawthorne smile a return again briefly before once again changing the subject. "I'll be gone for a few days, Wade. Everything you could possibly need will be on the first floor, and please, help yourself to anything. I only have one condition, son." "Yes, sir. Anything you want," Wade answered. "Call me John," the man said, grinning at him. After a few more minutes of exchanging pleasantries, John clasped Wade on the shoulder with his left hand, which, although normal, still had an iron-like grip, and told him to make himself at home and not to work too hard, laughing at this while walking over to his oversized Range Rover. Right before John grabbed the vehicle's door handle, he turned back to Wade with an entirely serious look on his face and said, "It feels like there's a storm coming, and a damn big one at that, son. You be careful and stay vigilant. Don't be shy about going inside. I think you might find some usefulness in there if such an event was to arise," John said matter-of-factly and almost hintingly. "Thank you, sir. I mean John," Wade said, correcting himself. John took a step away from his vehicle door and looked directly into Wade's eyes and said, "Some storms bring more than thunder and lightning, my boy." He then glanced down at his metallic hand before turning, entering his Range Rover and departing. Wade simply smiled and waved, chalking the ominous comment up to a metaphor about how bad things could go wrong in life, and began his job. The first 2 days consisted of mostly moving supplies from his van to the roof and tearing out the first of the weathered shingles and plywood. Wade had bought an extra long extension for the nail gun so he can keep the air compressor on the ground while working anywhere on the roof, for he wasn't about to even consider lugging that heavy piece of machinery up the 7 stories to the roof. Carrying the boards and shingles up was definitely the most time-consuming part of the 2 days, and now with enough building supplies in place, he can get down to the real work. It was only an hour and a half that went by until he needed a break. He had been punching in the large 3.5-inch framing nails with biggin, and the weight was making his right arm burn from the overuse at this point. After setting the large nail gun down, he raised his right arm and pulled it behind his neck with his left hand, stretching out the sore and tense muscles of his neck and shoulder. Sighing, he sat down on the side of the roof facing his van and the mansion's front entrance with the intention of enjoying his lunch break with a nice view. However, he quickly realized that his lunch was still in the van, so deciding to finally take John up on his previous offer, Wade thought he would eat his food on the mansion's first floor and check out the interior architecture. Sighing again at his stupidity, he grabbed the ladder's edge and began to put his right foot on the first step to begin his descent down, before a loud crack sounded from the forest directly in front of the mansion. The noise made him stop before his foot ever even touched the ladder, and was quickly followed by more sounds of the same nature. The sounds, although loud, still seemed distant. So distant, in fact, that whatever was making the noise had to be very large, thought Wade, and his shotgun was in the van. Maybe I should stay up here until the noises go away, or come closer enough to be identified, he thought. Whatever it was, it didn't seem to be in a hurry, for the cracks and crashes throughout the immediate woods before him moved methodically and with seeming purpose. Could people possibly make that much noise while hiking through the woods, he thought? Maybe, if they were clearing a trail as they walked, but this is private property. The whole damn mountain is, in fact, according to John. People get lost, Wade thought to himself. Maybe lost hikers, or even a damn poach. But the thought was instantly cut off as a pair of massive antlers appeared briefly in the tree line before the thick summer foliage covered them back up. Wade's breath caught with excitement, making him cough just a little before exclaiming, "It's him!" Wade reprimanded himself for yelling out loud and grabbed the phone from his back pocket. "I've got you now, my friend," he said, referring to the abnormally large buck he glimpsed and tried recording on his way up the mountain 2 days prior. "I can't believe I'm getting another chance to," but his thoughts were cut off yet again when he, for the briefest moment, saw 2 more pairs of unnaturally large antlers quickly following the first. 3 record-breaking bucks together at once. This wasn't right. And with that realization, a floodgate of even more peculiar things opened up and burst the carefully constructed dam of reason within his mind. That's impossible. The antlers, they can't be. The position the antlers were in were not possible. Not right. Wade had walked the property a few times by now, and had even hiked a bit around on his first day after work, and had gotten a good blueprint of the property in his mind by now. That's why he was so very alarmed, for the spot was easily 15 feet high minimum, and they didn't move like deer, but shifted back and forth in ways only bipedal creatures could do. What is this? As if to answer Wade's internal question, the first pair of antlers slowly emerged from the woods, along with what they were connected to. Wade had always heard people explain in movies and books how a cold chill would run up the person's spine, or how their nerves or insides would turn to ice, freezing them in place. Contradictory to everything he had heard, Wade felt hot, like every single nerve in his body was screaming at his brain, the way a child will scream in a tantrum until their face goes red and hot, trying to convey strong emotion they cannot understand, let alone explain. This was hot panic, thought Wade. As the chorus of his nerves hit its panic crescendo, all the logic and reason left him, like being abandoned by your oldest and most reliable friend, and being left in the dark with the image of that face approaching, and the impossible implication of the name it ushers with it. Monster.